Hello class. Today we're going to talk about solving equations. Now this is the second day we've done this, so let's see if we can review this real quick. First off, we need to remember what is an equation. Right? An equation is nothing but two expressions that are equal to each other. So we have one side that is equal to another side, like 2x plus 4 equals 7. This is one expression. This is another expression, and I know that they are both equal. And that's what an equation is. What is the ultimate goal that we have in an equation? Your ultimate goal is to solve for the variable. You need to make sure that this you have an answer for. Okay? So it's kind of like a mystery, and you're the detective. Your job is to figure out what goes inside this container, what goes inside this box. Now, one of the things that I expect out of you is to already know how to solve one-step equations. So let's just review that real quick. So if I have an equation that's got a plus 6 in it, I need to try to get this x by itself. So I need to get rid of this plus 6. Well, the way we do that is we add its opposite. So what I expect to see is x plus 6 plus negative 6, which is the opposite, equals negative 5. And if we add the opposite to one side, I have to add the opposite to the other side as well. I have to add that same thing, because this is kind of like a balance. If you remember the playground seesaw where you had a board right here and you had a little balance point, and this would go back and forth and back and forth. Well, this has to maintain balance. And in order to do that, you have to have the same type stuff on both sides. So if I add something to one side, that's going to make my balance go out of whack. Okay? So if I add the same thing to the other side, that now makes it balanced because it started out equal. So now when we do the rest of the math, my 6's will turn into 0, which means they go away, and I'm left with x is equal to, and then negative 5 and negative 6 gives you negative 11. Well, if it's a subtraction problem, I don't really like subtraction. So I will actually do exactly like what we did with integers. I will change my subtraction sign to an addition, and the next number to its opposite. This allows me to, if I mess up my numbers, if I get them out of order, I can still get the right answer. Now, the other thing that's hard about this question for most students is the letter is on the other side, on the wrong side of the equal sign. Don't worry about that. Just work with it on that side. Start at the equal sign, and let's get this m by itself. So I need to get rid of this negative 8. So I'm going to do m plus negative 8 plus positive 8. I add its opposite. If I add that to one side, I have to add the same thing to the other. And we end up with 30 is equal to m. So the value would be 30. Now, if we have a division problem, what we have to do is multiply. In order to get rid of the divide, we're going to multiply. So if I have a 4 on the bottom of a fraction, I'm just going to put a 4 on the top of the fraction. Okay, and then that will cancel things out. So then I multiply this by 4 as well. Oh, not 9. Multiply by 4 as well here, and we end up with these 4's dividing out. R is equal to negative 36. So if I were to plug that negative 36 back into the R, negative 36 divided by 4 will give me negative 9. Now if we have a multiply, to reverse a multiply, we just do a divide. So if I've got a 3 beside the y, I put a 3 underneath, and that will then divide them out. So then I have to divide this by 3 as well. So we end up with y is equal to 6. So basically, if you have a plus problem, you're going to subtract to get rid of it, which is add the opposite. If you had a subtract, we're going to basically add to get rid of it. If you have a divide, we're going to do a multiply. And if you have a multiply, you're going to do a divide. So everything we're doing it the opposite. Now let's kind of move into two-step equations. That's kind of the review of one step. In two-step equations, we got to think about this kind of a question here. This is just strictly an order of operations problem. What is it that we would do first in this particular question? If we did this one, we would work on the parentheses first. Then we would work on the multiply and divide. Oh, excuse me, not the multiply and divide, sorry. We would work on the exponents next. Then we would work on the multiply divide. And then last but not least, we would work on this addition. Okay, the addition and subtraction. So basically, in essence, we would take our order of operations and we would solve them according to the program there with, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. But what we end up with whenever I solve an order of operations problem is I end up with an answer. That's what I always end up with. But in an equation, we're already given an answer. Okay? So this equation here, I already have this answer. And your job is to work it backwards to find what's missing. What's missing there, okay? And in order to do that, what we do is we take our order of operations and we just reverse them. The last thing we did in an order of operations problem, which is add, subtract, is the first thing that I get rid of, or the first thing I work with in an equation. So in this one right here, I've got 4h plus 3 equals negative 9. So in order to get this h by itself, the first thing I have to deal with is this plus 3. Okay? So how do we get rid of a plus? We do a minus, or we add its opposite. So what I expect to see is 4h plus 3 plus negative 3 equal, so this is my opposite, that'll get rid of that 3, and I have to add that to the other side as well. So negative 9 plus negative 3. So now we do our math, but on this side, instead of like we had here, where I just ended up with an x, I actually end up with a 4h, which is equal to, and then we got 9, 10, 11, 12, negative 12. Now, we have a multiply. Well, in the one steps, how did I get rid of a multiply? We do a divide. So I divide this by 4, divide this by 4, and you end up with h is equal to negative 12 divided by 4 gives me negative 3. Now, if we were to take this negative 3 and plug it back into the original equation, 4 times negative 3 plus 3, does that actually equal negative 9? Well, 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. Negative 12 plus 3 does give me a negative 9. So all equations have a built-in checking mechanism. Well, let's try another one. And here's another one here. So 5t plus 12 equals negative 18. Well, again, our goal is get the letter by itself. So I start by getting rid of this plus 12. So we do that by adding its opposite. So 5t plus 12 plus negative 12 equals negative 18. Well, this is what I added to one side. So I've got to add the same thing to the other side. So the 12s go away. We're left with 5t equals, and then we put the negative 18 and the negative 12 together, which gives us negative 30. Okay. Now I have to get rid of the multiply by 5. So I do a divide by 5, do a divide by 5, and we end up with t equaling negative 6. Now again, I could plug this right back up in. 5 times negative 6 gives me negative 30 plus positive 12 will give me negative 18. So it works. Right? Let's try another one. Ooh, this time we've got a division. Right? But we still start off the same way. I still start off by getting rid of this plus 6. So g over 4 plus 6 plus negative 6, because I get rid of that by adding its opposite, equals negative 4 plus negative 6. So I add the same thing to both sides. So I end up with g over 4 equals negative 10. But this time, how do I get rid of a divide by 4? Well, we get rid of that by doing a multiply by 4. So if I multiply this side by 4, I have to multiply this side by 4 as well. So my 4's divide out, and I'm left with g is equal to negative 40. So if I were to plug that back into the original equation, negative 40 divided by 4, which we know is negative 10, plus positive 6 does give me negative 4 as my answer. So it does work. Let's try a couple more real quick just to kind of see some variation. Okay, here's one where I flipped it. Right? That's okay. Just get used to it. Just start on that side. I need to get rid of this 5. So 4n plus 5 plus negative 5. So this is the new thing. So I just move over a little bit and put 21 plus, well, what did I add on this side? I added a negative 5. So negative 5. So now we do the math here. 21 plus negative 5 gives us 16 equals 4n. Okay, divide by 4, divide by 4, n is equal to 4. And again, we plug it in. 4 times 4 plus 5. So 16 plus 5 does give me 21. Okay, two more real quick. Okay, here's another one. Now this one's kind of an interesting one. You'll notice that k is by itself. Okay, but what we do need to understand about this one is that this k, there is actually a 1 in front of it. Because how many k's do you see? 1. So whenever I change this, I end up with a negative 1k. Well, we start off by still getting rid of this 7. And we do that by doing 7 plus negative 7 plus negative 1k equals 15 plus, Well, the 7 that I added was this negative 7. So plus negative 7. So we end up with negative 1k is equal to, and now we have 15 plus 7, which is going to give our 15 plus negative 7, which actually gives us 8. Now, when we're looking at all of these answers here, all the ones that we've done, the letter has always been positive. Because what I want to know about is how much is, in this problem, how much is 1h worth? Positive 1h. How much is positive 1t worth? How much is positive 1g worth? And so on. So in this one right here, how do I get rid of this multiply by negative 1? We do a divide by negative 1. And we end up with k equaling, well, 8 divided by negative 1 gives me negative 8. Now, if you really paid close attention to what went on there, we did negative 1k is equal to 8. Well, in this answer right here, what happened? Here, my k is negative and my 8 is positive. But in my final answer down here, k is positive and my 8 is negative. So really what happens when you end up with a negative letter, all you have to do is switch the signs and it will work. One last question and then we'll be done for this lesson. So here is the last one. What if I have a fraction? Okay. Now we start off the same way. We still start off by getting rid of that 4. So 2/5 x plus 4 plus negative 4 equals 14 plus negative 4. So we end up with 2/5 x is equal to 10. Now, the first day when we talked about this, we looked at how to deal with this fraction. And we're multiplying by 2/5. So really what we're doing to get rid of a multiply, we do a divide. So I'm going to divide by 2/5. But if you remember your rules for dividing fractions, it says to divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second and multiply. So we have 2/5 divided by 2/5, which is what that problem would say. So that's really going to be 2/5 times, we flip the second. So we're just going to multiply by its reciprocal. We're going to multiply by its reciprocal, and that will get rid of it. So if we multiply this side by its reciprocal, I got to multiply the same thing over here. So these divide out, and we're left with 1x, which is exactly what I want. Now in order to multiply fractions, I need this 10 to be a fraction. So I place it over 1, and now I multiply. And if you remember, there's two ways of doing it. You can multiply straight across and end up with 50 over 2, or you could do some simplifying. This 2 and this 10 have a 2 in common. This turns to a 5, this turns to a 1. 5 times 5 is 25. 1 times 1 is 1. So x is just 25. So that's how we multiply, or that's how we solve two-step equations.